Welcome to Module 5 in 289M, and we're going to talk about how to manage group policies. So group policies has been a theme for the last couple of modules, and we're going to go a little bit deeper into what that means. So we're going to talk about group policy processing, policy client processing, group policy results, and modeling and managing GPOs. So an administrator should have a solid understanding of how group policy objects are processed, and that has to do with inheritance. So you've got local policies, you've got group policy objects, you've got some at the domain level, you've got some at the OU level. How are all these processed so they are done in the right order so you have the correct results that you're looking for? Group policy scope, it defines which objects are affected by settings in a group policy object. So you've got to keep that in mind. And then you've got group policy objects are applied in a certain order. So you've got local policies. All right, that's the policy on the local computer, right? Site linked, those are the multiple different sites that you have in Active Directory. You might have a Portland site, a Seattle site, and domain controllers in those sites. So after local policies, then the site group policies are applied next. Then you have the domain linked policies. That's the link for your particular domain. And our domain is widgetllc.internal. Then you have OU linked policies, and that's the OU that you're in. So if you're in the information technology OU or the accounting OU or whatever, that's the last one that's going to be applied when you go to log in. So if there's any conflicts, say between the site linked and the OU linked, the OU is going to win because it's the last thing that gets applied. Policies that aren't defined or configured are not applied at all, and the last policy applied is the one that takes precedence over the others, as I just mentioned. GPO, oh, by the way, you will see some questions on the quiz about this GPO policy order. So make sure you either memorize that or at least remember where the slide is so you can come back and get that information. So a GPO linked to a domain affects all computers and all users in the domain. But settings in a GPO linked to an OU, so if you're in the IT OU, for instance, will override the settings in a GPO linked to the domain if there are any conflicts. So basically just restated what I said earlier. When OUs are nested, so you've got OU inside of OU inside of OU, and GPOs are linked inside of those, the deepest nested group policy object is the one that takes place. So let's say we have an IT OU, and inside that we have a Portland and a Seattle OU, and each of those have different policies that are applied to them, and they conflict with the policy that's in the IT OU. So what's going to happen is we're going to apply the IT OU first, and then the Portland or the Seattle OU inside that IT OU is going to be applied afterwards. It's going to undo anything that conflicts with it. GPO inheritance is enabled by default. You don't have to set it up. It just happens. To see which policies affect a domain OU and where policies are inherited, you can go to the Group Policy Management console and look at the Inheritance tab in the right side of the pane. So there's several ways to affect the GPO inheritance. You can either block the inheritance or you can enforce it. So blocking the inheritance says only apply GPOs that are in my OU. Ignore anything else above it. Whereas GPO Enforcement says, hey, even if somebody tried to block this, it's going to be enforced anyway. So you've got a couple different things you can do there. So as I mentioned, blocking inheritance prevents the GPOs linked to parent containers from affecting the child containers. To block it, you go into the Group Policy Management console, right-click the child domain or OU, and block it. That's all you do. If blocking is enabled, the OU or domain object is displayed with a blue exclamation point. So if you see a blue exclamation point in your Group Policy Management console, then you know some group policy inheritance has been blocked. So you want to use that sparingly. Make sure that you're not causing yourself any problems. And this is exactly what it looks like. You can see that you can right-click on the OU and block the inheritance. And that's it. It's only going to apply the group policy objects that are in that OU itself and ignore everything above it. Group Policy Enforcement forces inheritance of settings on all child objects. So even if you have conflicting settings, then it's going to apply it anyway. The AGPO that's enforced has the strongest precedence of all GPOs in its scope. So if multiple group policy objects are enforced, the GPO at the highest level is enforced is that a level is enforced in a conflict. So you can end up with conflict states which will show up in log files. If a GPO linked to an OU and a GPO linked to a domain are both set to be enforced, the GPO linked to the domain has stronger precedence. So unlike the inheritance, where the OU took precedence over the domain, when you have inheritance turned on, then you, enforcement turned on, then you end up making it the opposite effect happen. Now it's going to affect the domain over the OU. So you want to use that inheritance thing, very sparingly. Enforcement thing, very sparingly. So there's the enforcement. You just right-click on the group policy itself, unlike the last one where we right-clicked on the OU. Now we're right-clicking on the policy, and we're choosing enforced. After group policy is created, group policy object, it can be one of the following states. You have link status unlinked, enabled, disabled, GPO enabled, etc. All these different states. View or modify the GPO status by clicking the GPO in the left pane on group policy and clicking the details tab. And it'll tell you what state it's in. So let's take a look at this now. We've got the test GPO 1 on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side we see the status. And there it is. You have enabled, you've got all settings disabled, etc. With the computer configuration settings disabled, it will only enable the user settings, and vice versa with the user settings disabled. So there you go. Not a real long module on this one, but very powerful. Gives you the idea of how to enforce and the inheritance involved with group policy objects. And I think that you'll find that very useful, especially when you have issues with group policy. I've been in many situations where group policy didn't work the way you expected it, and knowing this information helped me solve those issues by understanding inheritance and understanding enforcement. That'll do it for Module 5. We'll see you in Module 6.